All right, we're recording. So, welcome everyone. Hi, it's Neve from Ripple Out, and we have a very special guest today for a Ripple Out conversation. It is Tami Simon from Sounds True, and Tami is the founder and publisher of Sounds True, which is a multimedia wisdom publishing company. So, welcome, Tami, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
It's just so great to hear your voice. I have to say that I love your voice. I love the tenor and timbre of it. So to actually hear it here with me today is just really exciting.
Thank you. It's always great when someone loves something about you that you can't control. That's just natural. It's like, oh, good. Can't screw that up. It's just who I am.
So Tam, you have a really interesting story, and that was the reason why I invited you on here today to have a conversation with me today. So you started college, and when you went to college, you really wanted to find out the meaning of life. You found that your courses were not giving you that answer that you wanted, so you went to Sri Lanka, you studied with a teacher, and when you came back, from that year away, you say that the guidance that you were looking for literally dropped from the sky. And what you heard was disseminate spiritual wisdom. So you went on to found Sounds True. You had no business experience, and you sort of had a vague idea of what it is you wanted to do. And Sounds True has been what I read in all of my research and looking about, looking and understanding your work. It was said that Sounds True is spoken word spiritual teachings, which I loved. And as a formal English teacher, who did spoken word with my students, that really spoke with me. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. All of those things, finding out all those cool things about your life, how you knew what there was for you to do, what you did, and how you've done what you've done. So I want to start off. I want to do a check-in because I know this is something that you do with your in your organization. So I would like to just take a moment and check in with you right now, Tami. So where are you and what's here for you?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting in the context of a team is when people check in, how vulnerable, at what level of depth, whoever is in a leadership position in that team goes to. Because I think that sets the norm and creates the invitation and the welcome mat for other people to also share in a deep way. Because a check-in can happen at so many different levels, from, yeah, really busy, feeling great, I'm in, to, some real emotional process. So here in this context, it's interesting, Neve, because of course I'm not with you in person and with your audience. But in a nutshell, what's alive for me right now is it's an honor to be with you. I also noticed that I've been doing a lot of these webinar conversations, and it's always important to me to keep it fresh and real and not to start kind of rehashing parts of my own history that have become almost mythic to me, but to actually really be in touch with what's real and to offer something to people that's helpful. So as I look inside, what I want is I would really like to offer some good medicine today that will inspire people and uplift people.
Thank you. And, I would like to take a moment to check in too, because I noticed that I've been going back and forth between my head and my heart all day. My heart and my soul are so excited about doing this with you. And it connects so much to the deeper work that I've been doing for years. And then I get into my head of like, what if, and you better do a good job. So that sort of tension is there for me. And sometimes I think you need both. And yet I'm very much in line with what you're saying about like being present and being here fully, because I'm just so excited to be here today.
And Neve, I would invite you with me and with the audience that's listening, let's all go heart to heart. That works for me. I would love to receive you in that way.
Thank you, Tami. Well, so here's my first question. One thing that really compelled me in understanding and learning about your life was how you said that guidance just dropped from the sky. And in my work with women, one of the things that comes up is like, how do you know what there is to do with your life?
Yeah.
So I would love to hear more about that. So just
Yeah.
drop from the sky.
Sure. Well, to qualify a bit and set the stage, because when you hear a statement like that, guidance just dropped from the sky, it sounds like, you know, Tami's a miracle magnet or
Mhm,
something. And,
mhm,
you know, it's not true.
mhm,
As in, I went through a period that was very difficult, that was filled with a lot of anguish and despair, where I didn't know what my place was in the world. As you mentioned, I left college, I left an academic environment, and I really didn't know if I would ever have any kind of seat at any table of any kind. I didn't even know really if I belonged as a human on the earth with other humans. I felt
mhm,
like such an outsider, really. I felt sensitive and lost, would be probably two good words to describe my situation. What I mean by sensitive is I just didn't feel like I felt that I was part of the status quo of the culture around me, which looked coarse to me. I couldn't believe that, you know, just so many things as a young, idealistic person. Okay, so here I am, and I can't succeed in academia, even though that was the path that I had been trained to be on. I thought maybe I would be a professor
mhm,
of religious studies or something like that. Okay, so what was I going to do with my life? And before that guidance seemingly dropped from the sky, I spent a period of time praying quite intensively. And the prayer that I invoked was, God, I'm willing to do your work. Please show me what it is. Please show me. And there was an utter humility in me in that it could have been anything. It didn't have to be something that was going to make me a lot of money. It didn't have to be something glamorous, nothing like that. I wanted to somehow do something that felt, when I say God's work, I wanted it to feel inspired by something that was beyond me, something that felt like it was a gift flowing through me. And I had a sense of what God meant to me. And that, you know, it's very personal, whatever that means. But to me, it felt like timeless love. And I wanted to serve that in the world. So I'd said this prayer again and again and again and again and again.
mhm,
And a couple of days before this supposed sky fell, because it wasn't quite exactly like that. A couple of days before that, my father passed away.
mhm,
And when my father passed away, I was just 21 years old at the time. He was 63, and I inherited a small amount of money. Upon his death, I inherited approximately $50,000, which today, now 36 years later, would be about $200,000 with inflation. So for a college dropout, out of work, 21-year-old, this was a lot of money. And interestingly, I had been volunteering at the local Boulder community radio station, KGNU, and I was interviewing spiritual teachers. I was trying to get the education that I couldn't get in academia, but that I still wanted. I still wanted to learn. And one of the people I was interviewing, we were having a preparatory conversation. And I mentioned to him that I inherited this money and that I wasn't sure what to do with it. And he said, why don't you put it into yourself?
mhm,
And I was like, okay, that sounds really good. Sounds good conceptually. But like me and myself, we don't know what we're doing. Like we don't know what we're up to, you know. So great idea. And he said, why don't you come back in 3 days and we'll talk about it? Come back and we'll talk about it. And he looked at me and he said, you know, Tami, I think you know what you want to do.
mhm,
So that was an interesting moment. It was a moment of permission where he said, I actually think you know. And actually, I think that's one of the most interesting things about listening to guidance is that I actually think we often know what we're called to do. We often know it inside, but we won't admit it to ourselves. And we won't admit it to ourselves because we're not sure it's going to work. We're not sure it's going to be socially acceptable. We're not sure we're going to make a lot of money at it, whatever. Anyway, I left his office, and then this is where the mystical event happened. And it was a mystical event. As I left his office after this conversation, I started feeling like I was walking a little bit above the ground. It was a very odd experience. And quite honestly, it's an experience I've had only once in my life.
Mhm.
This moment in time when I was 21, I've never had that experience before or after. And I felt like I was walking about 3 feet above the ground.
Wow.
And then I heard a voice inside my head. Maybe it was an interior voice. Maybe it was, a voice of a guiding spirit. Who knows? I don't know. I still don't know. But I heard very clearly, disseminate spiritual wisdom.
Mhm.
And then my feet hit the ground. And I had been reading a book at the time, and this is a lot of detail, but I'll just be brief, by Eugene Genlin. The book is called Focusing. And in the book, Focusing, you pay attention to the felt sense inside your body, and you start to track what your body feels like in different states of knowing. And so there's a way that I knew, because my body felt so odd, it felt like I was walking above the ground, that something was happening that was really important.
Mhm.
It was clear. It couldn't have been more clear. Pay attention, Tammy. This is important. But then my feet hit the ground and I was like, okay, I'm going to disseminate spiritual. And I started thinking about it. How am I going to do it? And I went through an analytical process and I thought, well, I could audio, video, books. Well, books, I'm so academia, all those big fat books, a lot of existing mature business. I'm not sure about that. Video, my parents watched a lot of television, and the whole TV tray television culture, I just didn't want to be a part of that. And then audio, I was like, oh, now that's interesting. I volunteer already at the radio station. I love listening. I love listening to beautiful voices. You talked about the power of the voice and everything that a voice can carry. And even at that young age, I loved listening to what's known as Dharma talks,
Mhm.
inspirational talks by spiritual teachers. It was my favorite way of learning. And I thought, okay, I'll disseminate spiritual wisdom and I'll begin using the audio medium. So that's how Sounds True got started.
Wow. I have so many questions that I want to pursue. One of the, well, I'm going to start in a place that you touched on when you were talking about being 3 feet above the ground. That is a very unusual experience. And I actually just did the Eckhart Tolle class, Conscious Manifestation, with Sounds True, this summer. And I love Eckhart Tolle's work. I've been reading his stuff for years. And one thing that he talked about was that idea about, meditating and accessing or hearing the deep I. And he says in his inimitable voice, he says, it's not like you're going to hear, a voice or you're going to have a conversation. He said it comes and appears to you. So I thought that was really interesting. First of all, yours did appear to you as words, and sometimes it does appear to me as words as well. But I consciously, when I was doing that course, would go for a walk every day and I would pose a question and then I would just wait and I would just walk and I would look at the trees and look at the sky. And invariably what I found is by the end of the walk, maybe like an hour or so, there was some semblance of knowing at the end about what the answer to my question was. So when I know you said that you pray, you ask questions, and you want to understand what that intelligence is. You also just talked about sort of like markers in your body. Can you tell us a little bit more about that when you're trying to understand
Well,
what it is
yeah.
for you to understand?
Well, first of all, I think you're making a really, really important point, which is the power of asking questions. I work with an energy healer, someone that I see that I have a lot of respect for. Without going into too much detail, she has said to me that if you can ask the right question,
Mm,
almost always she will get an answer in the reading. So I often think before I go see her, what are my real questions? I have to ask like the best questions I can
mm,
ask, the most sincere question I can ask. So I think that's a very, very important idea that you've brought forward, Neve. And then the second part, which is, well, how do you know? Body signs. And I think this is all very individual. It's
mm,
really individual. And I think we have to learn our own inner vocabulary, the way that our unconscious mind speaks to us, our guidance speaks to us. Again, to repeat myself, it's always speaking. Like
mm,
that's not the challenge. Like people think, well, I don't get guidance, I don't believe that. I think the challenge is that we don't want our life to change as much as our life would change if we actually listened to the guidance that we're getting. And we also may not have the courage to have some of the conversations we actually have to have with the people in our life if we were to listen to our guidance. So I think that's actually where the work is. It's not so much figuring out the body signals and stuff like that.
Mhm.
It's having the courage to let your life change.
And a question that came up for me when you were asking that and posing that is for us as individuals to ask the question, perhaps, you know, what am I resisting?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's interesting.
Mhm. So there's another piece that you said when you were talking there, Tammy, about how you had this understanding that your wisdom now was to disseminate spiritual wisdom. Your understanding was to disseminate spiritual wisdom. And then you immediately went to sort of an analytical space of like figuring out how to do that. So that's another thing that I think is really fascinating about understanding who we are in the world, who we truly are, and how we bring it into the world. Because those are two very different things. It's sort of like the being and there's the doing. So can you talk to me a little bit about like how you find the balance between being and doing? Because we live in such a doing world that we can get caught up in this busyness and forsake the beingness. And yet without the doingness, without the, you know, if we just have the beingness without doingness, nothing's going to happen. So can you talk about
Yeah,
tension?
sure. Well, I think most people in our culture don't run any risk of spending too much time in being.
Mhm.
Everything is stacked in the doing direction. All the ways we measure success, all the ways we take pride in our busyness, all the ways we want to accomplish things that other people will confirm and validate and say, oh, that's good, that's important. For me, I can tell when I've lost my root. So the root is the sense of beingness. The root, it's once again for me, I'm a very physical person, so I feel things. So if I feel like I'm all up in here, it gets
Mhm.
kind of flat, surfacey, and I don't even care about what I'm talking about anymore. I don't
Mhm.
even care about what I'm reading anymore.
Yeah.
I don't even care about the meal I'm eating. Like, I don't care. Actually, I'm just doing it. Then
Yeah.
I know I'm disconnected from being. When I'm connected with being, everything feels more, I guess the metaphor that occurs to me right now is like a fountain or a flower blooming. And those metaphors have to do with something from deep below. Like if we take the flower blooming, there's a sense of a root system in the earth. And that's kind of the beingness that's rooted, it's anchored. And you can feel it. You can feel that there's a heaviness in your body, there's a presence. Other people notice it about you. That's a person who has gravitas. They have presence. They're really there. There's something about being when I'm with them where I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel the space around them is making space for me. That's being. And we start to recognize it in ourselves. The fountain metaphor is once again this sense that from deep below us, whatever is being given expression to, there's a sense that it comes from something genuine, from a source of, with a fountain, pure water, like a deep well below. That's the being well. And so I think for us Westerners, it's to not get cut off and to always make sure we're in touch with being or return to being when we need to, and then trust and know that being always gives birth to expression. It
Mhm.
always does. It's not like you just stay there. It's like being. There's something that happens, some creative spark, something comes, some flower blossoms, some idea, some like, oh, I'm going to call that person, or, oh, I feel like writing a poem, or, oh, that's so beautiful, even. I'm just going to feel it and note it. And there's always this birth process happening in us from being.
What I noticed when you were talking, often when you were talking about your difference between being and doing, your hands were right here at this level. And
Yeah,
I noticed often for me that when I am getting to my doingness and not beingness, that my head almost feels heavy. And what that made me think of when you were doing this was the idea that we end up just living in our heads and disconnecting ourselves from our bodies. Um, and you also talked about like a listening, and I guess that sort of maybe you didn't, but it came up with this idea about listening or truly seeing. And what I've learned in those moments when I can truly be present is that there is a listening and a seeing that is different, that is present for me when I'm able to truly be.
yeah.
Is that something that you've noticed?
Oh, yeah. I also just think we know we need to reconnect with being when we've lost our sense of, and this is a word that's not used a lot, but I think it's a really important word, contentment.
Mm,
When we no longer have any sense of, you mentioned Eckhart Tolle, he calls it the joy of being. And I think, especially in our time, it's so easy to lose track of that natural rootedness. And so when we return, it doesn't mean that we don't respond to injustices or that we don't embrace grief when it comes up, but it means that there is a bedrock of being that is something like a celebration of being alive, just being alive, even all the challenges, even all the difficult emotions. There's some sense, Joseph Campbell called it the rapture of being alive. And that ultimately, that's what we're all seeking. We say we want meaning. We say we want purpose. We say we want all of these things. This was Joseph Campbell's teaching, that what we want is the rapture of being alive. And I believe that. I believe that's available to all of us. That's what being is to me. And when we return to that and we create from that place, everything that we do has a quality to it that people can feel, and it feels fresh. The word that's occurring to me is it feels original, not original as I've never heard it before, but original as in from a source of origin. It's coming from, that's why I like this image of coming from below, as if it's coming
mm,
almost from the center of the earth, which is just a metaphor, but it's coming from darkness up into being. And it feels like, oh, that feels fresh.
mm.
Something about it has energy.
And when you were talking there about those ideas, something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I've always been fascinated by the idea of time. There's a great book called Einstein's Dreams, and it's multiple theories about time. And my thought recently this summer has been that we live our life in blocks of time and we take time to be real. And yet I've really come to the understanding that time is just a sort of like a construct of the ego to be able to understand yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And in our modern world, we do need this construct of time. But if we separate ourselves from the construct of time and kind of like make space in between a block of time, we end up in that place that you were just talking about, like blooming and growing. And I've been able to get the sense that time is just a constant flowering over and over and over again. It's like this constant blooming as opposed to a linear thing from beginning to end.
Hmm. And I think what's important is that each one of us will be a unique, one of a kind blossoming.
Mm,
And this is one of the things that's really important to me, because I think sometimes when people are listening to other people and they're like, I need to find role models. I need help figuring this out. What am I going to do? How am I going to bring my voice forward? Well, la, la. I think to myself, well, the most important thing is that you learn to trust your own being.
mm,
Learn to trust your own being and let it have its way with you, because nobody else has ever been you with your DNA,
mhm, mhm,
with your particular talents and superpowers and liabilities and relationships and everything that you've got going. No one else, one of a kind. We're each one of a kind. And I think when we learn to trust that and follow that, then we're able to actually find our way. But if we look outside too much and
Mm,
try to replicate things, who knows? Who
mhm,
knows if it's going to work?
mhm,
I think each one of us has a grace field, and that grace field comes from within our own being. We have to be true to that. And when we're true to that, I think the blossoming happens. Who knows how big it will be? Who
mm.
knows how shiny it will be? Who knows what, the smell, the fragrance? It will be a unique fragrance, one of a kind. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. Uh, a thought came up, like another tension that I've noticed in this moment of asking a question, what is there for me to create? What is there for me to be, to bring into the world? And then the actual creation can be sort of like the interference of ego. How do you distinguish between the purity of beingness and ego?
Oh my. Well, I'd have to ask you, I think, Neve, for a clarifying question, which is, what do you mean by the ego?
Ah. So I get tons of ideas, right? I mean, it can be both a blessing and a curse. Like in one day, I can have 1,000 ideas for things. And most of them make me really excited. I've learned to be able to sort of like say and recognize that I can't do them all, right? Um, and another way that I've learned to sort of distinguish them is like, okay, so this thing that I'm about to do or that I'm wanting to do that I'm getting excited about, is it truly coming from this expression of who I am? Or is it coming because there's something I want to get on the other end?
Right. Well, first of all, what I'd say is I think in general, ideas are pretty cheap. It's not that big a deal. Carolyn Mace once offered this very powerful teaching, and it had to do with creating through the chakras. And the way she described it was an idea comes in from above, top of your head, and you're like, oh, I'm going to talk about it, blah, blah, blah. You haven't risked anything yet. Then it goes into your heart. Okay, that's a big deal. Am I really willing to put my heart into it? But still, then it gets down into your self-esteem. Can I stand behind this idea? Really, am I the person to do it? But now you get down lower in your belly. And the question becomes, am I going to put my money into this?
Mm,
Am I going to put my time into this? Am I going to risk my name for this? Am I going to actually do something to make this happen? Really? And that's where it starts getting real. The whole
mm,
thing starts getting real. And a lot of ideas don't make it beyond that point. They don't actually stand the scrutiny of, am I going to put my money into this? Am I going to put my name into this, etc. And so I think the first thing is, does all these fabulous ideas, does it pass the test of, okay, I am called to take some kind of risk, actual risk to do this, not just talk about it, because talking about it, there's no risk involved. Then, okay, I'm going to take a risk. Now, things don't always just happen just because you have a great idea that's aligned with your soul. I think one of the things that's required of us is tremendous perseverance,
mhm, mhm,
tremendous endurance, tremendous grit. And so, whatever idea, is it so resonant? Do
mm,
I care so much? Am I so called to do this that I will stick with it for years? I care that much. This is mine to do. I feel it. Or is it like, hey, I'm going to give that to someone else. Let them do it. It's a cool idea, but I'm never going to do it. Not really. And so I think the first thing is being really ruthlessly truthful with yourself about what is yours to do. Sometimes it sounds true. I've worked with different people, and one person was accused of having this quality of always chasing the new shiny object.
mm, mhm,
And this person did have that habit, and it made the whole company crazy. They're
mm,
like, it's a new shiny object, but like, can we just stick with what we're doing when people say kind of mind your knitting? So I think part of it, and I don't know if this is really ego, not ego, I don't know if it answers that part of your question, but I think the key is finding something that's so right for you. You would do it whether you were paid or not. you would just do it. Because guess what? If it's an idea that you invest in over many years of your life, there'll be plenty of times when you're doing it when you're not getting paid. So it has to be something you care so much about. You love it so much, you're so invested in it that you would do it no matter what, and that you would stick with it over time. And it brings out your innate qualities and what you care the most about. It fits with your actual true native gifts and talents, because that's what we all like. We
Mhm.
like using the talents, the things that we're good at, you know, we like being in our, you can call it our genius zone. So does that idea fit all of that? And then can you do it at whatever level? Maybe it's small. Maybe you just do it part-time. Okay, like let the universe come in. And, you know, I've been recently reflecting on this a lot. And this is through the work I've done with someone that I work closely with, It Sounds True, said, you know, my motto is 30% of any endeavor is up to me and 70% is up to the universe.
Mm.
That's really interesting. So
Mhm.
it's like you do it at some level and then let the universe come in. It's 70% of the equation. It's the majority partner. Let it come in and support you. And it supports you because of people responding to you and responding to your emails, responding to your calls. The audience responds. You
Mhm.
get lucky breaks, seemingly. But if you let it be 70%, then watch what the universe does
Mhm.
and go with its support.
That's a fascinating way of looking at it. It's almost like I'm just seeing a river flowing, and you're
Yeah.
the river is flowing.
Yeah. And occasionally you got to put your oar in and do some work. You
Mhm.
know, it's not that, it's not like it's not there. But if you think about that, look how much more powerful the river is than you and your little oar. You know, what's more important is establishing that alignment with what I would call a soul river. Because if it is a natural river of your soul, it will be fueled, it will be funded, it will be supported. So it's being true about that.
So here's a question that I ask women that I interview, and because it's interesting, we're getting to the the usual steps that I they get to, and we get stopped as human beings. There can be external things that stop us, and there can be internal things that stop us. I find the internal things that stop us, examining that, kind of more interesting than external things. Um, so, what would you say are the internal things that have stopped you and that still stop you from pursuing this beingness and pursuing your goals? And when you set a goal, like getting to that place where
Yeah.
you think you want to get to.
Uh, I mean, I think one of the obstacles I have to work with is that I can override myself.
Mhm.
So I can not know what my limits are. So I can get overcommitted and overbooked and overextended. And then I lose that connection with beingness. So that's one of my challenges is being really sober and realistic
Mhm.
about my time, energy, and how much I can do, and saying no, saying no. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but I can get overextended, and then when I'm overextended, I'm no longer in the deep river. I'm a little flat out.
Yeah. So another question then, what is what is here for you to explore next? You've done so much. Like I said, I've just so enjoyed reading the history of all the work that you've done, and I perused the list of authors that you have and writers on Sounds True, and I have just benefited from so many of them over the years of my work. So what is here for you to explore?
Uh, well, so first of all, I'm a big fan of endless growth and
Mhm.
endless human development. And at one time, I was talking to a teacher I really respect. His name's A.H. Almas. That's his pen name. He writes under that name. His name is Hamid Ali. He started the Diamond Approach. and we were doing a series called Endless Enlightenment, that there isn't one discovery that defines enlightenment in
Mm.
his worldview of the diamond approach. Then there's another discovery and another discovery and another discovery, almost like you're a space explorer. And there's always a new dimension of outer space, a new planet, like we can get into a Star Trek metaphor, to be discovered. It's endless. And he said, Tami, enlightenment is endless because delusion is endless. Our delusion is endless. And after interviewing hundreds of the supposedly most awake and enlightened humans in the world, I can attest to the fact that delusion is endless.
Wow.
That's okay, that there are parts of all of us that are still needing to grow and develop, new things to be discovered, new ways we can kind of bust ourselves from our own unconsciousness, our own shadow material. So as a person, I'm endlessly growing, endlessly growing. There's so much deepening happening in my intimate relationship. I've been with Julie, my wife now. We've been together for 19 years. And I just see how much further we have to go. And that's really important to me. That's the center of my life, center, heart, reservoir of everything for me. So that's really important to me. We have 2 dogs. One's 5 years old named Raspberry. One's 3.5 named Bula. My relationship with Raspberry and Bula also so mysterious. Like we think they're dogs, but like these beings are so interesting, and they're onto me, I'm onto them. So that's very important. And then I have a fantasy, just since you asked, Neve, which is I would like to become the captain of a boat. And that's because Julie and I are building a home on an island in British Columbia. And we'll be spending a good portion of each year up there starting next year, knock on wood. And I would like to learn to be a boat captain and to have a boat and go out and be with dolphins and whales and go on excursions. So, it's interesting. I was with some friends over the weekend, and I was reflecting how when I was 39 years old, which was when I met Julie, there were 3 things I wanted. At that point in my life, Sounds True had already grown to about 10 million a year in sales, and it had reached a level of success. But it's not that it couldn't have a lot more, sure, but it had reached a level. And the 3 things I wanted were nothing to do with work, nothing to do with business. I wanted a deep and loving marriage partnership, which I had not had to that time, and I was 39. I wanted to bring my own voice forward more instead of always being behind spiritual teachers. And I wanted to have a kind of confidence in the face of death that I had actualized my spiritual potential and that I was at peace with dying, that I hadn't wasted this incarnation and the possibility to know being, really, to know the transcendent dimension. So those were the 3 things I wanted at 39. And I joked with my friends, those 3 things, I don't want them anymore. I feel okay on all 3 fronts. Not that there's not deepening in all of those domains, because as I said, deepening's available. Now I just want to captain a boat.
I love the simplicity of that. Oh, that's great. Well, so in closing, I want to ask you one thing for you to share, perhaps with women. I work in leadership development in the school system, and what I see is there is the job that people are doing that's up here, and there's always a longing and a wanting underneath for something else. What guidance would you give a woman to be able to know that and then have the courage to follow through on it?
Well, one thing is we can express our leadership and our heart and our capacity in whatever situation we find ourselves in. Sounds True created a program called the Inner MBA, and as part of it, I've been interviewing different CEOs, and I interviewed a woman named Padma Shri Warrior, who was a chief technology officer in some very large technology companies. And some of the questions that came into her was, look, you work for these really large companies, Cisco Systems. How can you possibly, bring everything you know about conscious leadership into these companies? Come on, how do you do it? And she said, I focused on what I could control. I focused on what was under my control. And each one of us can do that. So what's under our control in the circumstances we're in? What conversations can we impact? Who can we lift up during our day? What acts can we take where we have to stretch a little bit, to be a little more generous, a little more kind, to reach out a bit more and see how people are really doing, to say something that might actually make that person's day, to add a PS onto our email, or take some time at the beginning. Like, there's so many ways in whatever situation we're in, so many things that we have control over, that we can bring forward the beneficence of who we are, the benevolence of who we are. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing, if you're convinced that you're not in the right place and there's some risk that you feel coming inside, I need to take it. My recommendation is find a way to do it such that you don't scare the you-know-what out of yourself, the bejeebers out of yourself. Make a bridge. Do it in a way where you don't have to be terrified. Do it part-time. Do it on the side. Like, I think sometimes we build up these notions of, if I'm going to change and lead it, it's all for, it's 100%. And that's honestly not the way I grew Sounds True over 35 years. I never risked more than we could afford to lose in any new venture. It's like, if it doesn't work out, we're fine. If it doesn't work out, we're fine. Risk a little. Don't scare yourself. And then let the universe come in and play its 70% role and be surprised. Watch yourself be surprised.
I love that. I love that. So final question today, Tami. What I want to say thank you, first of all. This has been, I feel like I could just ask you questions for the rest of the evening. But I would like to know, what are you taking away from our conversation today?
I think what I'm taking away is a further reinforcement of something I've been starting to do for the past month, which is I've been taking a noon Kayut yoga class online as many days a week as I can. And it really helps me relax tension in my body, let go, and it connects me to being. And taking that time as often as possible during the week has been so helpful. And so I feel reinforced through the conversation to keep doing that. That's where the gold is.
Wonderful. Well, what I'm taking away today, Tami, is a heartfelt gratitude for your generosity in giving me this time, and the depth and the breadth of the conversations of our beingness, and how vast and beautiful and wonderful it is.
Thank you, Neve.
Oh, thank you so much, Tami.
Thank you.
And I wish you well in captaining your ship.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.